What would you do if the kindest, sweetest person you knew was pushed past their absolute limit? In today's story, a gentle grandmother's response to an unimaginable tragedy is a masterclass in how to handle it, delivering a form of justice that was as cold as it was complete. I was part of this story, but I wasn't the one who dealt the revenge. I was just a witness to it. Years ago, I worked at a veterinary clinic with our receptionist, a woman named Eleanor. Eleanor was, and still is, an incredibly sweet 65-year-old woman who had been with the practice since it first opened its doors, some 40 years prior. She always had a smile for you, a quick joke, a heartfelt compliment. And on your birthday, you could always count on her for some home-baked goods. I never once heard her say an unkind word about anyone. She was genuinely one of the most wonderful people I'd ever met. And it seemed like she knew everyone, from our regular clients to the mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing in Eleanor's life, through no fault of her own, was her neighbors. She and her family lived next door to one of the trashiest, most unpleasant families I had ever encountered. And they owned 2 pit bulls that were even nastier. These dogs were always getting out and terrorizing the neighborhood. They'd even tried to get into her house before. As many have pointed out, animals like that are incredibly dangerous. And a small child wouldn't stand a chance if the dogs decided to attack. Eleanor had pleaded with the family multiple times to please keep their dogs contained. She was especially worried because she had an elderly, pleasantly plump cat named Winston. And these dogs had a history of attacking smaller animals. The family's response was predictable. They essentially told her to get lost, that they knew what they were doing. And how dare she criticize the breed? They made a fatal error at that moment, dismissing the pleas of a woman they saw as a harmless old lady. They were completely unaware that this single act of casual cruelty would lead to their own downfall. Eleanor knew that other neighbors had filed reports against them, but nothing ever seemed to come of it. So, she did the only thing she could. She kept Winston indoors at all times, being incredibly careful to ensure he never slipped out. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice I'm using the past tense when I talk about old Winston. And yes, what happened was just as awful as you imagine. 3 weeks before Christmas, Eleanor was enjoying a day off. She was in her garage, fiddling with some Christmas decorations, with Winston keeping her company. Unbeknownst to her, the pit bulls next door had gotten out again. This time, they broke right through the bottom panel of her garage door. Before she could even blink, they were on Winston, tearing the poor cat apart. Eleanor screamed for help. And it wasn't until her son and husband rushed out with a baseball bat that they managed to wrench Winston from the dog's jaws. I was on duty at the clinic that day. I will never, ever forget the moment she came in, crying harder than I have ever seen anyone cry, clutching the dying, mangled body of Winston in her arms. Her husband had to hold her up as our team rushed to save him. But it was too late. It would have taken a divine miracle to bring him back. He passed away right there, a truly horrific end to what should have been the golden years of his fat, happy cat life. Eleanor just sat there for a long time, quietly crying and holding his broken body. Finally, she kissed a part of his fur that was still intact, stood up, and looked at us. Her voice was steady when she said, "I've got a job to do. Take care of him, girls." And then she walked out. We all assumed she'd take a few days off to grieve with her family and then life would go on. We were so wrong. It's often said that good people are tolerant and forgiving. But once you push them too far, you're finished. As the saying goes, demons run when a good woman goes to war. When I said Eleanor knew everyone, I meant everyone. Right after leaving the clinic, she composed herself and went straight to the police station, armed with photos of poor Winston's body, and told her story. She told it to the very same police officers she had watched grow up. The ones she used to help babysit when they were rowdy kids. They were horrified to hear what had happened to their surrogate grandmother and immediately pushed her case to the front of the line. From there, the case landed on the desk of a judge whose daughter had been a school friend of Eleanor's daughter. The judge granted an emergency dangerous animal extraction warrant for her neighbors. The hearing happened with ridiculous speed. Just 2 weeks later, the neighbors tried to argue that their dogs were gentle giants. They even had the audacity to accuse Eleanor of fabricating the entire story because she had a vendetta against them. Their argument began to crumble as dozens of prior dangerous animal reports were presented as evidence. It completely evaporated when Eleanor's grandson's surveillance video was played, clearly showing the dogs breaking into her property and viciously attacking Winston. This revealed the neighbors' greatest fatal flaw, their blinding arrogance. They genuinely believed they were untouchable, that their actions had no consequences. And it was this belief that ultimately sealed their fate. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of the dogs was granted. It was Christmas Eve when Eleanor heard a knock on her door. She opened it to find her neighbor standing on her porch, sobbing hysterically. They were begging her, pleading with her to call off animal control. They cried about how they'd had the dogs since they were puppies, how their kids would be devastated, how it would ruin Christmas forever. They begged her to find it in her heart to give the dogs another chance. Let's be clear. Up to this point, these people had behaved abominably. They never offered to repair her broken garage. They never apologized for trying to slander her name in court. They didn't even offer to pay for Winston's cremation. At no point had they shown a single shred of remorse for what their animals had done. And so, as they stood there on her porch, blubbering about how this was going to ruin their Christmas, Eleanor looked them dead in the eye. The air was cold, and the festive lights of the neighborhood twinkled around them. A stark contrast to the ugliness of the moment. After a long, silent pause, her voice emerged, calm and as sharp as ice. "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours." She shut the door in their faces just as the animal control truck pulled into their driveway. Eleanor wasn't surprised. After all, having the dogs collected on Christmas Eve was her idea, a small perk of having known the animal control supervisor for years. She even made sure the dogs were euthanized before the city's official Christmas lights turned on that evening. The fallout was catastrophic. The family never received the dogs' remains. That very same night, the father got drunk, drove his car into a telephone pole, and was killed instantly. The mother spiraled. And by February, CPS had stepped in and taken the children. By September, the house was in foreclosure. Despite the trauma of Winston's death, I sometimes think that if the neighbors had shown even an ounce of regret, Eleanor, being the forgiving person she is, might not have gone so far. But maybe she knew it had to be done. That she had to push it to this point of no return before another family lost someone to those irresponsible people. Either way, Thank you, Eleanor, for making the world a little safer. And rest in peace, Winston. This story is a stark reminder that actions have consequences. And that even the kindest people have a breaking point. When that line is crossed, the justice they deliver can be as swift and devastating as the initial offense. Eleanor delivered a form of justice some might call brutal, while others would call it perfectly balanced. What do you think? Did she go too far? Or did her neighbors get exactly what they deserved?